So due to the nature of the circumstances, I'm always, forced to have to think about, no matter how hard I try to escape with video games or fucking whatever bullshit. And then also, of course, recent fucking experiences, just with these smartphones and fucking modern operating systems, and just software and every bullshit I've already mentioned. So I think a lot more about Terry Davis and his stuff. And I wish I were smarter and knew more about programming so that I could just write my own shit, or at least be good enough at it to be able to like reverse engineer stuff. But because I've been thinking about it more, like I've been looking more into like hex editing programs or like disassemblers and shit like that. Um, because the hex editor I have, it can't like edit like live memory or whatever, right? I thought about maybe trying Cheat Engine. I know it's meant for games, but it can do stuff like that, and I wonder if it just work with software in general. But you know, a hex editor or something with like a disassembler, kind of like I had mentioned. I seen that one guy talking about his fix of Painkiller, where I had to edit that one file. Being able to find something like that, um, I would just like to have better ways to be able to stop, you know, these piece of shit softwares from being able to fuck me over. But I get in a mood here and there where like I'll try fucking with this shit, like as far as programming. And so I did that this time. The other day I was trying to fuck with Vice. It's a Commodore 64 emulator. And I've fucked with it in the past, but like, mostly like fucking with Peak and Poke or whatever. But this time, because I thought about Terry Davis, and I'll watch a lot of his older stuff, like Loose Though Sarah stuff. Big part of it for me is nostalgia and the escapism stuff, but also I really like seeing, just what he was capable of. And, I wish I could program well enough to take advantage of it, because it's really not an end user system. It's truly a hobbyist programmer system. And I'm not capable of that kind of shit. But um the other day I decided to try fucking with it again. And this time I wanted to try playing a little bit with assembly. But I knew that, Commodore 64, like the basic stuff is just, not that interesting in my opinion. Basic is in the programming language. So I decided, well, let me maybe try assembly, and actually get used to the actual, opcodes and machine instructions and all that shit. Part of what also spurred that for me was because I replayed Jurassic Park Trespasser, and there's the one level where you find the Cray supercomputer, and it got me off on thinking about like older computers and like RISC versus CISC architectures, and like for example with CISC, which is complex instruction set or whatever. One assembly opcode might actually create multiple machine instructions. I mean, if it's a totally CISC architecture, it will every time. But most stuff is not purely CISC or RISC. At least modern CPUs will tend to be a blend of the two to some degree. Um, and there was something else I thought about. A lot of older games, because I've been playing so many, thinking about that, but also thinking about the fact of getting them running on modern systems. Now with like weirdly, Codename 47 seems to work straight out of the box, but Silent Assassin and Contracts, the fastest way I can get them working well enough for me to just play them, uh, is to change the renderer in the INI file from D3D to OpenGL. And then all of a sudden it's not like pitch black anymore, and you can actually play it. Contracts is weirder though, because even at 4:3 resolutions, the aspect ratio of the actual rendering in the game is stretched. And the only way to make the game, like 47 and not be like, you know, twice as wide as he should be. And I mean, everything. It's like the actual geometry is stretched. And it's like, for whatever reason, the only way to fix that is with the widescreen patch. I don't understand that. But, you know, um, I was thinking about a lot of, you know, the older games and getting them working. And it all led me into thinking about Terry Davis and just like low level programming in general. Um, so like the CISC architectures are, in a way, they're sort of like, like these older games where now I don't ever have to do this, at least so far. Like, I can get the Hitman games working fine in most of them, but sometimes you'll see people say, oh, set the CPU affinity so it's like one core, right? Like usually CPU 0. Well, there's a lot of shit like that. The non-deterministic or whatever, like ambiguity, because in the past with older CPUs and at least Windows 7, if you set the CPU affinity, it would basically use that. But modern OSs, if you set that setting, you're really just kind of giving it a suggestion. Hey, I would prefer if you did that, but it might not. Okay, well, it's even worse than that, because if you had a modern CPU, even with something like Windows 7 that basically fully acknowledges the CPU affinity, at the level of the CPU itself, it has its own like internal programs, and like it will shuffle. Like, it might, at the hardware level, not put it on CPU 0, right? It might put it on some other one, because like at the hardware level, it's doing all this bullshit because they're worried about like cache coherency or like, I don't know, whatever other stupid shit, because they can't admit that Moore's law died 20 years ago, right? I mean, that's why they moved this to multi-core in the first place. But that was something else making me think about it. So like, if you look at like a CISC architecture, they say assembly is like bare metal, but yet with CISC instructions, you know, you don't, you give it the opcode, but at that point the CPU is doing whatever the fuck it's doing, right? Um, but something like the Commodore 64, in this context, it's like, well, you know what? I wanted to have another try at fucking around with the programming stuff. Let me try that Commodore emulator again. And so I actually wanted to do assembly with it. I mean, that CPU is it's a RISC architecture, isn't it? I actually don't know, but either way, thinking about all that made me think of trying that stuff again. But I figured, whatever. There's a Commodore 64. There's 40 or whatever years of documentation on it. It's an emulator, so if I fuck up, who cares, right? Um, so I ended up watching this video tutorial, and it was a good tutorial. Uh, and I didn't just like skip to the end and like, all right, let me just type out the whole program. Like, I actually followed along and listened to what they had to say, kind of explaining it. Well, the problem was, so I downloaded the fucking assembler that he wanted you to use for it, and as it went through, I did everything exactly correctly. It was something, it was like incrementing a register and then printing the results from the accumulator. This is a pretty simple program. I couldn't have done it on my own, but at the same time, if you showed me the pseudo code, I'd be like, all right, cool, right? Like, I get it, But it is a basic, pretty much, loop and just printing the characters. But there's a point in the program where he changes it so that when it prints the characters, whenever you press a key, it clears the screen before it'll say like ready again, right? Well, as I had done up to that point, I totally did it exactly how he did it. I printed it out to the screen to make sure that the program was correct, exactly how his was. But when I ran the program, I did the syscall or whatever it was to make it actually not compile, or whatever with the assembler, but actually run the program. It worked correctly till I did the, like press any key thing, and then it was just blank. And I couldn't even put inputs in. So I reset the CPU through the emulator, and the program was like still in memory, right? So I could print it out and then I could run it again. But if I hit the, like any key, right, like it did the same thing. So at that point, I'm like, okay, what the fuck? So I just hard reset the emulator, actually closed and reopened it, reloaded the, the tape file for the assembler. And then I sat there and did everything exactly the same way again, start to finish, triple, quadruple check to make sure I wrote the whole program correctly. But now every time I try compiling it, it just says syntax errors. It just won't compile, even though I can't see what the fuck I did different. Um, and so now it doesn't work at all. And I'm like, okay, is this a bug in the emulator, right? Like, is my version outdated? Like, did I find some bug or something? Like, I don't know. But it's like everything. Like, I had this happen so many times now with Codename 47, Silent Assassin, and Contracts. Those games are really bad about this, right? You'll ace a run, but then like you get fucked over at the last second. And when you restart the mission, now everything goes wrong every single fucking time, right? The shit that was just no thought at all the first time, now none of it works, right? And you eventually get just sick of it and just turn the game off. I had a couple missions like that I can, like, on Silent Assassin, I can pretty easily ace, like Anathema and Kirov Park meeting on Pro, right? And like get like, zeros or whatever. Well, I had that happen, right? It's like I get fucked over, somehow I get seen or like whatever, and then now none of it works, and I just keep getting spotted like right at the fucking start. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? But it's like even with the programming bullshit, right? Like, I never fucked with Holy C really. I mean, honestly, the few times I tried, I couldn't even really figure out how to navigate the OS. Although, granted, I didn't spend that much time on it. Um, I mean, I'm going to try it again at some point. Probably do a virtual machine or whatever. But I wouldn't be surprised if Holy C would fucking do that shit, right? So I could copy a program or whatever like he did, and all of a sudden it won't compile for me, right? And it's always been just bizarre shit like that. And that's another big problem with all this, paging and virtual addressing and like blah blah and all this stuff that he talked about is totally true. Like, yes, it is complicated, and most individuals are not equipped to comprehend it. But it's worse when you are capable of that, and then a modern OS is just hiding everything from you to the point to where it's like, I wouldn't be surprised that if I update that emulator for Commodore 64, all of a sudden the assembly will work again. It's like I could have very well somehow accidentally triggered a bug in the emulator, and it's just totally borked it, and like I'll probably never figure out what the problem is, right? Like even with level design, as I mentioned before, Hammer Editor, sometimes all of a sudden your map will just break, and the only thing that will work is copying the entire map to a new file and saving a new file, right? Everything else is identical, but somehow that is the only thing that works. And it's just, code, level design, all this. It's like whether it works or not, like you never have any idea why, right? It's like the best you have is like your programming script input outputs or whatever. It's just like a suggestion and it just kind of does what it wants.